pregnant widow faced winter alone, until a cowboy built a fence and stayed. The first snow came quietly that year, falling in soft, cold flakes that covered the small ranch in a blanket of white. It was beautiful in a way that made the heart ache, for it reminded Evelyn Harper of all that had changed. She stood on the wooden porch of the old farmhouse, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other gripping the railing her husband, Thomas, had built with care just months before his death. Each board seemed to hold a memory, his laughter, his advice, the way he would hum while he worked. Now those memories were all she had. Evelyn had been alone ever since Thomas's sudden accident. It was a crisp autumn morning when he had gone into the woods to check on the fallen logs that his neighbor had warned were dangerous. No one knew exactly what happened, only that when the men went to find him, he was gone. Just like that, the life they had built together ended. Thomas had been her partner, her protector, and the father of their soon-to-be-born child. Now she faced the cold, the farm, and the uncertainty of the future entirely by herself. The snow lay thick on the fields, covering the collapsed fence that separated their property from the woods. Thomas had promised to fix it before the first freeze. Evelyn had watched him talk about the fence for weeks, measuring and planning, jotting notes on scraps of paper, and smiling as he imagined the animals safely inside the pasture. Now the fence was broken, a tangle of splintered boards and fallen posts, half buried in the snow. Without it, the livestock could wander into the woods, and predators could get too close. She worried constantly about the safety of the cows and the chickens. Every creak of the wind or snap of a branch outside made her heart pound with fear. Evelyn had never imagined facing a winter alone. She had grown up in a small town, surrounded by family, neighbors, and friends. Even when she had moved to the ranch with Thomas, she had believed that love and partnership could weather any storm. But now everything felt different. The silence of the fields was heavy, almost unbearable. The wind blew across the empty pasture like it wanted to fill the house with loneliness. She tried to keep busy, though her body was growing heavier each day. The baby inside her was a constant reminder that she had to survive, no matter how difficult life became. She chopped firewood, prepared meals, and tended to the animals as best as she could. But everything was harder alone. Even simple tasks that Thomas had taken for granted now left her exhausted. Carrying heavy buckets of water, repairing the broken gate, or stacking wood for the fireplace required all her strength, and yet she forced herself to keep going. Nights were the hardest. The farmhouse was cold despite the fire in the stove, the walls creaking with the weight of the winter wind. She would sit by the window, looking out at the snow-covered fields, remembering the warmth of Thomas's presence. She remembered how he would wrap his arm around her and whisper, "Everything will be okay." Now she whispered to the baby, promising to keep them safe, though she wasn't always sure she could. Her neighbors were kind, but their help was limited. Everyone had their own farms and families to manage. Some brought food or checked in when they could, but no one could stay long enough to truly help with the heavy labor. Evelyn appreciated their kindness, yet she felt the full weight of the responsibilities pressing on her shoulders. She realized that survival would depend not just on her strength, but on her courage and determination to face each day, no matter how bleak. The animals seemed to understand her struggle. The cows huddled together in the corner of the pasture, their breath rising in clouds of mist. The chickens clucked nervously as they pecked at the snow-dusted ground. Even they were struggling against the winter cold, yet somehow Evelyn found comfort in their presence. She whispered to them softly, encouraging them to keep moving, to stay warm, as if her words could shield them from the dangers outside. Evelyn also noticed the small signs of life returning, even in the midst of her grief. She saw footprints in the snow of a fox, the delicate tracks of rabbits hopping through the fields. The snow glistened in the sunlight each morning, a reminder that even after darkness, beauty remained. She held onto these moments, small but significant, as proof that the world was not entirely cruel. Despite her resolve, there were moments when fear overwhelmed her. She worried about what would happen if the animals escaped. She worried about the baby being born in such harsh conditions. She worried about herself, about how long she could continue to work and survive on her own. Sleep was often interrupted by worry and pain, leaving her drained but unable to rest. Yet she kept going, for she knew that giving up was not an option. Each day, Evelyn repeated a quiet ritual. She would step outside early in the morning, brush the snow from the porch, and check the condition of the fence. She would feed the animals, water them, and then return inside to prepare food and tend to the house. Every task was a struggle, yet she found a strange comfort in the routine. It gave her a sense of purpose, a reason to face each day despite the cold, despite the emptiness. Sometimes she would talk to Thomas aloud, imagining his voice and presence. She told him about the weather, the animals, and the little victories she achieved. It helped her feel less alone, as though he were still there, guiding her through the difficulties. She even imagined him repairing the fence beside her, giving her advice on the proper way to secure the posts and tighten the wires. In those moments, her grief softened, replaced by determination and resolve. As the snow continued to fall, Evelyn began to notice small cracks in her courage. She feared that winter would last forever, and with it, the loneliness that had become her constant companion. But each morning, when she stepped onto the porch and saw the sunlight reflecting on the snow, she felt a spark of hope. She reminded herself that the baby inside her depended on her. That life, no matter how fragile, had to continue. Evelyn also reflected on her marriage, remembering the moments of joy and partnership that had defined her life with Thomas. She remembered their shared laughter as they worked in the fields, the quiet evenings by the fireplace, and the dreams they had for the future. These memories were bittersweet, but they also strengthened her resolve. She would honor Thomas's memory by protecting the life they had created together. Even in her darkest moments, Evelyn found ways to adapt. She learned to manage tasks more efficiently, using tools and techniques Thomas had taught her. She discovered inner reserves of strength she had not known existed. She began to see herself not only as a grieving widow, but as a capable, determined woman who could face the challenges of winter alone. The snowstorm that came one evening seemed relentless, covering everything in a thick layer of white and blocking the narrow paths to town. Evelyn huddled by the fire, listening to the wind howl outside, feeling both fear and awe at the power of nature. She tended the animals carefully, making sure they were safe and warm. She carried water from the well in heavy buckets, her muscles aching, her body weary. Yet she persevered, knowing that she could not fail. As days turned into weeks, Evelyn's body grew heavier, the baby moving strongly inside her. She felt both excitement and apprehension, knowing that soon she would have to bring a child into this harsh winter world. She thought about the support she might need, the challenges ahead, and how she would face them alone. Yet with each challenge, her courage grew, and she began to believe that perhaps she was stronger than she had ever imagined. Through the long, cold nights, Evelyn often sat at the window, watching the moonlight dance on the snow. She imagined Thomas's arms around her, the warmth of family and love, and the possibility of new beginnings. She whispered to the baby, telling stories of their father, of the land, and of the hope that lay beyond the winter. These quiet moments became her lifeline, connecting her past, present, and future. Despite exhaustion, fear, and grief, Evelyn never stopped moving forward. Each day she faced the cold, repaired the house, tended the animals, and cared for herself and her unborn child. She learned to find beauty in small things, the way sunlight reflected on snow, the sound of animals moving in the barn, the warmth of the fire at night. These small comforts reminded her that life, though difficult, still held hope and promise. By the end of the first month of snow, Evelyn had begun to find a rhythm. She could manage her chores more efficiently and had learned to anticipate problems before they became crises. The fence still lay broken in places, but she made do, using temporary fixes to keep the livestock safe. She felt a quiet pride in her ability to survive, and though loneliness still pressed on her heart, she began to understand that survival was about resilience, determination, and the love she held for her unborn child. The winter was long, and Evelyn knew that many more challenges awaited her. Yet she also understood that she was not powerless. She had survived the first snow, faced the first cold nights alone, and had managed to keep life going on the ranch. Each small victory built her confidence, and she began to believe that even in the harshest conditions, hope could endure. Evelyn's story of survival in those first weeks of winter became a quiet testament to human resilience. She showed that love, determination, and courage could carry someone through even the most difficult times. The broken fence, the cold nights, and the lonely days were obstacles, but they were also lessons in strength, endurance, and the power of hope. And so, as the snow continued to fall, Evelyn Harper stood on her porch, feeling the cold wind on her face and the life growing inside her. She knew that winter was only beginning, but she also knew that she had the strength to face it. The farmhouse was silent, the fields were white, and the broken fence waited for repair. But inside Evelyn's heart, warmth and determination glowed like a fire that no storm could extinguish. Evelyn Harper had grown used to the rhythm of the farm. Every morning she would step outside, brush snow from the porch, and check the animals. Every evening she would light the fire, cook what little she had, and settle by the window, watching the moonlight on the snow-covered fields. She was tired physically and emotionally, but she had learned to keep going for herself and for the baby. Then one morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, she noticed someone standing by the broken north fence. His silhouette was tall and broad, a cowboy hat pulled low over his face, his coat dusted with snow. He appeared calm, almost as if he belonged to the land, yet there was something unfamiliar about him. Evelyn instinctively held her breath, unsure whether to call out. She didn't know who he was or what he wanted. The man looked up, saw her on the porch, and tipped his hat slightly. "Good morning," he said in a quiet, steady voice. "Name S. Caleb Morgan. I heard about your fence and I thought you could use a hand." Evelyn blinked. She wasn't used to strangers approaching, especially in the middle of winter. I don't need anyone," she said cautiously, though her voice trembled slightly. It's just a broken fence." Caleb didn't seem offended. He smiled faintly. "I know it's just a fence. But fences are important, especially this time of year. I figured I could help if you want." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. There was something different about him, something kind and patient. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He simply stood there, watching her, waiting. After a pause, she nodded. "All right," she said softly. If you want to help." Caleb didn't answer with words. He simply walked over to the fence, knelt in the snow, and began to examine the posts. He moved with confidence, like he had done this 100 times before. Evelyn felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. She had been managing alone for weeks, but seeing him work made the task seem lighter somehow. Over the next few days, Caleb became a constant presence. He worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing the fence one section at a time. His movements were precise, almost methodical, yet there was a quiet care in everything he did. He measured twice before cutting, he checked each post for stability, and he made sure the wire was taut enough to keep the livestock safe. Evelyn watched him from a distance at first, unsure whether to speak. She had grown accustomed to solitude, and the idea of sharing her space with someone new felt strange. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Evelyn finally stepped outside to help. She carried a stack of boards to the fence, her fingers numb from the cold, her cheeks red from the wind. Caleb glanced up and smiled. "Careful with those," he said. "The snow makes them slippery." "I can manage," Evelyn replied, placing the boards near the posts. But as she bent to pick up a loose nail, her footing slipped, and she nearly fell into the snow. Caleb was there in an instant, steadying her with his strong hands. "Easy there," he said gently. "We'll take it slow." For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt a strange warmth, not from the fire, but from the presence of another person. She realized that having someone there didn't make her weak. It made her feel safer, more capable, even stronger. Days turned into a rhythm. Evelyn and Caleb worked together side by side. They repaired the broken posts, hammered nails, and stretched wire across the fields. Evelyn learned to pass tools to him without fumbling. Caleb learned to anticipate her needs, offering help before she even asked. They spoke little at first, sharing only brief words about the work. But gradually, conversations began to flow about the weather, the animals, the land, and sometimes about life itself. Evelyn discovered that Caleb was from a ranch 2 counties over. He had grown up on a farm, learning the trade from his father, who had taught him that work done with care was a kind of respect for the land, for the animals, and for people. He had no family nearby, and he had traveled during the autumn to help others who were struggling with winter chores. He didn't boast about his skills. He simply moved with quiet confidence, letting his work speak for him. One evening after the work was done, Caleb helped Evelyn carry firewood into the house. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold, and the snow sparkled in the fading light. They paused on the porch, catching their breath. Evelyn looked at him, studying his face. There was a gentleness in his eyes, a quiet strength that seemed to say he would never leave. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Caleb tipped his hat back and smiled. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'm just glad I could help. You've been doing all this on your own. That's impressive." Evelyn felt a pang of pride mixed with vulnerability. She had survived on her own, but now she realized that she didn't have to do everything alone. Having someone beside her didn't diminish her strength, it complemented it. As the days passed, the snow grew deeper and the temperatures dropped. Evelyn worried constantly about the safety of her animals and the condition of the house, but Caleb was always there to help. He reinforced the barn doors, checked the roof for leaks, and made sure the animals had enough food and water. Evelyn began to trust him not just with work, but with her safety. She no longer feared facing winter entirely alone. One afternoon, a sudden gust of wind blew a section of the fence loose. Evelyn rushed to secure it, but her hands were cold, and she struggled to lift the heavy wood. Caleb arrived just in time, taking one end of the post and steadying it while she hammered it into place. "See," he said with a grin, "teamwork makes everything easier." Evelyn laughed, a sound she hadn't heard in weeks. It felt good to laugh, to share a moment of relief and joy in the midst of struggle. She realized that life, even in the harshest winter, could have moments of lightness, if only she allowed herself to notice them. As they worked together, Evelyn began to share small stories about Thomas, about the life they had built, and about the baby growing inside her. Caleb listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. He asked gentle questions, showing interest without prying. Evelyn found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. It felt safe to talk, to remember, and to hope again. One evening, as the sun set and painted the snow in soft shades of orange and pink, Caleb and Evelyn finished repairing the last section of the north fence. They stood together, surveying their work. The fence was strong, straight, and secure. Evelyn felt a rush of relief and pride. "You did a good job," she said quietly, glancing at Caleb. "We did it together," he replied, his voice steady and calm. There was a moment of silence, a shared understanding between them. No words were needed to express the connection that had grown through hard work, shared effort, and mutual respect. Evelyn realized that she had come to rely on Caleb, not just for his strength, but for his presence, his steadiness, and his quiet kindness. Winter was still coming, and challenges would continue. But for the first time, Evelyn felt that she was not entirely alone. There was someone who cared, who was willing to stand beside her, and who could help shoulder the burdens of life on the ranch. As the days grew colder and the nights longer, Caleb remained by her side. He helped her chop firewood, tend the animals, and prepare meals. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with small gestures and quiet words. Evelyn felt a growing sense of trust and comfort, knowing that Caleb was reliable, steady, and kind. One night, as snowflakes fell softly against the window pane, Evelyn sat by the fire, knitting a small blanket for the baby. Caleb sat across from her, reading a book he had brought along. The fire crackled, casting warm light on their faces. For a moment, the world outside seemed distant and cold, but inside the farmhouse, there was warmth, safety, and a sense of companionship that Evelyn hadn't felt in months. She realized that Caleb's presence had changed everything. The farm was no longer a place of fear and loneliness. It was a place of hope and strength. The snow was still deep, the wind still howled, but she no longer faced it alone. Together, they could handle the challenges that winter would bring. Evelyn began to imagine a future that included Caleb, not as a replacement for Thomas, but as someone who could walk beside her, share in the hardships, and offer support and care. She felt a quiet hope, the kind that grows slowly, almost unnoticed, until it becomes impossible to ignore. By the end of the first month of working together, the north fence was fully repaired, the animals were safe, and the house was warm and secure. Evelyn had gained not just help, but friendship, trust, and a sense of partnership she hadn't thought possible after Thomas's death. She realized that life could continue, that joy could return, and that the bond formed through shared work and quiet care was something precious and enduring. Caleb had come to the farm as a stranger, but he had stayed as a friend, a helper, and eventually, someone who mattered deeply to Evelyn and the life growing inside her. The snow continued to fall, but with each passing day, the cold seemed less frightening, the darkness less lonely. Together, they faced winter with courage, determination, and the quiet promise of something new on the horizon. Winter had tightened its grip on the small ranch. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing every field, every fence, every tree, until the world outside looked soft, silent, and endless. Evelyn Harper had grown used to the cold, to the long hours spent tending the animals and preparing the house, but this winter felt different. The wind was sharper, the nights longer, and the snow seemed to pile faster than she could clear it. She worried constantly about the safety of her animals and the coming birth of her child. She had learned to rely on Caleb Morgan over the past weeks. He had become a steady presence on the ranch, always ready to help, always patient, always kind. He repaired fences, reinforced the barn doors, and helped carry firewood into the house. But even with his help, Evelyn felt the weight of winter pressing on her shoulders. She was alone in many ways, responsible for life itself, for the baby, for the animals, for every decision that mattered in the frozen landscape. One night the wind howled like a living thing. The snow was falling so thick that the path to town was invisible, and the farmhouse shook under the force of the storm. Evelyn sat by the fire, knitting a small blanket for the baby, her hands trembling slightly from the cold and exhaustion. She could hear the cows moving nervously in the barn, the chickens huddled together for warmth, and she wished for Thomas's calm presence. She whispered to the baby, "We'll get through this, little one, I promise." Suddenly, a sharp pain gripped her abdomen. She gasped and clutched her belly. It was different from the usual discomfort of pregnancy. Her heart raced. She realized with a mixture of fear and awe that the baby was coming. Alone in the middle of a blizzard, she was going into labor. She called out, her voice shaky. "Caleb, Caleb!" He was already nearby, checking the fence for damage from the wind. He heard her cry and rushed inside, his boots crunching through the snow. When he saw her, he didn't panic. Instead, he knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Easy now," he said calmly. "We're going to get through this together. Just breathe." Evelyn nodded, trying to focus on her breathing as another wave of pain washed over her. She had prepared for the baby, studied the old midwife book her grandmother had left her, but she had never imagined giving birth in the middle of a snowstorm. The fear and uncertainty pressed on her, but Caleb's presence gave her strength. He moved quickly and carefully, setting up a warm area near the fire with blankets and clean sheets. He boiled water, prepared towels, and made sure everything was ready. "We'll do this slowly," he said, his voice steady. "I'm right here with you. You're not alone." The storm outside intensified, snowflakes beating against the windows and wind rattling the frames. But inside the farmhouse, there was a sense of focus and calm. Caleb guided Evelyn through each contraction, reminding her to breathe, to stay strong, to trust her body. She clutched his hands, drawing strength from his steady grip. Hours passed. The blizzard raged outside, covering the world in white. Inside, Evelyn's breathing was steady, her determination unwavering. Caleb stayed by her side the entire time, offering water, adjusting blankets, and speaking in quiet, reassuring words. He had never been so close to such an intense experience, yet he never faltered. His calm presence became a shield against fear. Evelyn's mind wandered in moments between contractions. She thought of Thomas, of the life they had shared, and of the baby that was almost here. She imagined holding the child in her arms, feeling the warmth of new life despite the harsh winter outside. Caleb's support made her feel safe enough to let herself imagine the joy that could follow the struggle. Finally, as the night edged toward morning, the first cries of the baby echoed through the farmhouse. Evelyn's heart swelled with relief, exhaustion, and love. She looked down at the tiny, fragile body in her arms, a daughter alive and warm despite the snowstorm that raged outside. Caleb stood nearby, quietly holding blankets and warm water, his eyes reflecting pride and wonder. "She's beautiful," Caleb said softly, leaning closer to see the baby. "Yes," Evelyn whispered, tears running down her cheeks. "She's perfect." For a moment, the storm outside seemed distant. The wind still howled, and the snow still fell, but inside the farmhouse, warmth, life, and hope had returned. Evelyn felt a wave of gratitude toward Caleb, not just for his help, but for his presence, his steadiness, and the way he had never left her side. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the storm began to ease. Snow still covered the fields, but the intensity lessened, leaving the world outside soft and quiet. Evelyn rested with her newborn daughter in her arms while Caleb cleaned and organized the supplies they had used. He moved with quiet efficiency, never drawing attention to himself, yet making everything easier for her. Evelyn marveled at how much she had relied on him, how much she trusted him. He had come to the farm as a stranger, yet in the hardest night of her life, he had become her anchor. She realized that sometimes help arrives not as a grand gesture but as steady, unwavering presence when it is needed most. Over the next few days, as the snow settled and the wind calmed, Caleb helped Evelyn recover. He chopped firewood, fetched water, and made sure the baby was warm and fed. Evelyn rested, allowing herself to lean on him for support in ways she had never done before. The house, once cold and quiet, was now filled with soft laughter, the sounds of the baby cooing, and the shared comfort of two people learning to care for one another. Evelyn noticed small things about Caleb that made her heart feel lighter. The way he smiled gently at the baby, the way he moved carefully to avoid startling her, the way he always spoke with respect and patience. She realized that trust, once earned, could create a bond stronger than fear. She felt safe enough to laugh again, to imagine a future that included hope, companionship, and the possibility of love growing in a world that had seemed so harsh and lonely. The ranch, though still covered in snow, felt different now. The fences were repaired, the animals were safe, and the house had warmth and life. Evelyn knew that challenges were not over, winter was far from finished, but she also knew she was no longer facing them alone. Caleb's presence gave her strength she hadn't realized she had, and she began to see the storm not as a threat, but as a challenge they could overcome together. One afternoon, Evelyn sat by the window with her newborn daughter on her lap. Caleb worked outside, repairing a section of the barn roof that had been damaged by wind. She watched him move with ease even in the snow and felt a surge of gratitude. He had given her more than help with labor or chores. He had given her the reassurance that life could continue, that love could be found even after loss, and that hope could exist in the most unlikely places. Evelyn spoke softly to her daughter, telling her stories of her father, of the land, and of the people who had helped them survive. She spoke of courage, patience, and the quiet power of kindness. Caleb occasionally paused to listen, offering gentle words of encouragement. Together, they created a sense of family, of warmth and safety in the middle of a cold and challenging winter. As the days passed, Evelyn recovered more fully, and Caleb's presence became routine. They worked together seamlessly, feeding animals, stacking firewood, repairing fences, and preparing meals. Each day, their trust and respect for each other grew. Evelyn realized that life had given her a second chance, not just in the form of her child, but in the form of someone willing to stand by her side when she needed it most. One evening, after a long day of work, Caleb and Evelyn sat together by the fire, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. The snow outside had slowed to a gentle flurry, and the world seemed calm and serene. Evelyn felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. She looked at Caleb, and without words, she understood that he had become a part of her life, someone she could rely on, someone who had shown her the quiet strength of true care. Winter was still present, but its power had been softened by warmth, love, and companionship. Evelyn knew that more storms would come, more challenges would arise, but she also knew that together they could face anything. The baby had brought new life and hope, and Caleb had brought steady support and friendship. In the harshest winter, Evelyn had found a small family, a place of safety, and the beginnings of a future worth embracing. As the snow settled and the farmhouse glowed with the warmth of firelight, Evelyn Harper felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had survived the storm, welcomed new life into the world, and discovered the power of human kindness and support. Caleb had come as a stranger, yet in the hardest night of her life, he had become her anchor. She knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with courage, love, and hope. Spring arrived slowly on the small ranch. The snow melted in soft patches, leaving the ground wet and muddy, but full of promise. Tiny green shoots pushed through the brown earth, and the smell of damp soil filled the air. Birds returned, chirping and flitting from tree to tree, reminding Evelyn Harper that life was moving forward, even after the long, harsh winter. Evelyn stepped outside one morning with her newborn daughter, Grace, bundled in a warm blanket. The sun felt gentle on her face, and the wind no longer carried the sharp bite of winter. She breathed in deeply, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs. The ranch was quiet, yet alive in its own way, the gentle lowing of cows, the soft clucking of chickens, the creaking of the repaired fences as a light breeze passed through. Caleb Morgan was already outside, working on the barn roof. Evelyn watched him from the porch, a small smile on her lips. Over the weeks since the storm and Grace's birth, he had become an essential part of her life. He repaired fences, fixed the barn doors, and strengthened the well pump. His presence had become steady, dependable, and comforting. She realized that she no longer felt the same fear she had when winter first arrived. With Caleb, life seemed manageable, even hopeful. One morning, Evelyn decided it was time to take Grace outside for a short walk around the yard. She carried her daughter carefully, feeling the baby's warmth against her chest. Caleb paused in his work, noticing them. He smiled and waved, his hat slightly dusted with morning dew. "Careful with her," he called out. "The ground is still slippery in places." "I will," Evelyn replied, feeling a surge of warmth at his concern. She realized how much she had come to rely on him, not just for practical help, but for his gentle presence and steady care. She watched him work for a moment, marveling at his skill and strength, and then turned her attention back to Grace, who was gurgling softly in her blanket. The days turned warmer, and the ranch slowly shook off the last remnants of winter. The animals seemed to sense the change, moving more freely in the fields and exploring areas they had avoided during the snow. Evelyn felt a sense of pride and relief. She had survived the winter, delivered her baby, and kept the farm running with the help of Caleb. Yet she also realized that her life had changed in ways she hadn't expected. Caleb's presence had grown from help into companionship. He didn't rush to claim a place in her life. He simply stayed. He was there when she needed help, there when she needed comfort, and there when she needed someone to share the quiet moments with. Evelyn found herself talking to him about things she hadn't shared with anyone, her dreams for Grace, her memories of Thomas, and even her fears about the future. He listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. One afternoon, as they worked together in the pasture, repairing a small section of fence that had weakened in the thaw, Caleb paused and looked at Evelyn. The sun was warm on their faces, and the breeze carried the sweet scent of early blossoms. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I don't have to go back to my ranch. I can stay here if you want me to. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Evelyn stopped for a moment, the hammer in her hand resting against the post. She looked at him, surprised and touched by his words. You would stay?" she asked quietly. "I would," he replied. "I've grown to care about you and Grace, and this place, it feels right. I want to be here if you'll have me." Evelyn felt a rush of emotion. She had feared loneliness for so long, and now, someone she trusted, someone who had proven his kindness and strength, was offering to stay by her side. She realized that this was more than companionship. It was a chance for a new beginning, a chance to build a life with someone who respected her and her child. I would like that," she said softly, a smile breaking across her face. "I think we both need it." From that day on, Caleb stayed. He became not only a helper but a true part of the family. He played with Grace, taught her to hold a small wooden spoon, and helped Evelyn with chores while also sharing moments of laughter and quiet conversation. Life on the ranch, once harsh and lonely, became warm and full of hope. The animals thrived as the weather grew milder. Evelyn and Caleb worked together to plant new crops, repair the barn roof, and strengthen the fences against the next season. Each task, once burdensome, became a shared responsibility, and each small success was celebrated with a quiet smile or a word of encouragement. Evelyn realized that life was no longer about surviving alone. It was about thriving together. One evening, after a long day of work, Evelyn sat on the porch with Grace in her lap. Caleb joined her carrying 2 mugs of warm cider. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the animals move freely in the fields and listening to the gentle rustle of new leaves on the trees. Evelyn felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since Thomas's death. The world had been harsh, winter had been cruel, but now, with Caleb by her side and Grace in her arms, she felt the promise of life and love once again. She realized that happiness could grow slowly, quietly, and steadily, even after great loss. Caleb handed her a mug and she took it with a smile. "To new beginnings," she said softly. "To new beginnings," he echoed, raising his mug in quiet agreement. Over the next weeks, their bond grew stronger. Caleb learned the rhythms of the farm and the small routines that made Evelyn's life easier. He became a part of the household, a source of support and comfort, and a father figure for Grace. Evelyn, in turn, discovered a joy she hadn't expected to feel again, friendship, trust, and the quiet thrill of sharing her life with someone who truly cared. The ranch, once silent and lonely, was now full of life and movement. Chickens clucked in the sun, cows grazed peacefully, and the wind no longer carried the harshness of winter. Evelyn felt a deep gratitude for the seasons, for the land, and for the people who had brought warmth and love into her life. One day, as Caleb repaired a gate in the pasture, Grace toddled toward him, her tiny hands reaching out. He knelt to greet her, lifting her into his arms and spinning her gently. She giggled and Caleb laughed, a sound that made Evelyn's heart feel light. She realized that this was what life could be: laughter, warmth, love, and shared responsibility. Evelyn began to imagine a future on the ranch that included Caleb as a constant presence. She saw family gatherings in the warm farmhouse, Grace learning the rhythms of farm life, and the quiet joy of watching the seasons change together. She understood that life, even after loss, could offer hope and happiness, as long as one was willing to accept it. The neighbors noticed the change as well. They saw Caleb helping with the farm, sharing meals with Evelyn and Grace, and supporting the family in small ways. They admired the strength and resilience of Evelyn, who had faced winter alone and now thrived with her daughter and a trusted companion. Word spread quietly in the small town about the widow and the cowboy who had built a life together through courage, kindness, and determination. As the days grew warmer and the first flowers bloomed, Evelyn felt a sense of closure and beginning at the same time. She had mourned Thomas, she had faced the harshness of winter, and she had given birth to Grace. Now she could look forward, knowing that she was not alone and that love in its quiet, steady form had found its way back into her life. Caleb, too, found a sense of belonging. He had traveled to help, expecting only to repair fences and leave. Instead, he had found a home, a family, and a sense of purpose that he hadn't anticipated. Together, he and Evelyn nurtured the land, cared for Grace, and built a life rooted in trust, respect, and quiet affection. One morning, Evelyn watched Caleb teaching Grace to balance on a small fence rail. She smiled, feeling the joy of watching her child grow in a safe, loving environment. Caleb looked up and caught her gaze, and she saw the unspoken bond between them, a promise to protect, to care, and to face the future together. The ranch had transformed alongside them. The fences were strong, the barn secure, and the fields ready for planting. Life had returned, not as it had been before, but as something new, stronger, warmer, and full of possibility. Evelyn realized that survival was not the same as living. With Caleb and Grace, she was no longer merely surviving, she was thriving. As the sun set on a clear spring evening, Evelyn sat on the porch with Grace in her lap and Caleb beside her. They watched the animals move freely, the wind carry the scent of fresh blossoms, and the light fall softly over the fields. Evelyn felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that the hardships of winter had given way to hope, companionship, and the quiet promise of a life filled with love. She whispered to Grace, "We are safe, we are together, and we are going to be all right." Caleb squeezed her hand, a silent agreement, and together they watched as the last rays of sunlight touched the snow-melted ground. Life on the ranch had changed forever. The widow who had faced winter alone had found strength, resilience, and a new family. The cowboy who had built a fence had also built a life alongside them. And together they faced the future, knowing that even in the harshest storms, hope, love, and courage could endure.